Have you ever heard a Widowmaker player complain about dying to a Hanzo and then talk about how Hanzo is allowed to shoot literal tree logs as arrows, but I, as a Widowmaker player, have to be precise? Well, that's actually one of the biggest misconceptions in Overwatch. Speaking from a projectile standpoint, Hanzo actually has the smallest projectile size out of any projectile hero in the game, alongside Genji. Those logs you're talking about are actually being shot out by heroes like Mizuki, whose projectile size is nearly 4 times bigger than Hanzo's. The size of Mizuki's projectiles, which he's constantly shooting out the entire game, is more comparable to Orisa's javelin, which has been heavily criticized in the past for being absolutely huge. This is a topic that doesn't really get brought up much because not many people really even know or even care about the size of a projectile. When you're in the game, there's no way you can go to check how big a projectile is. The only way to check is if you fully go out your way to go online, hop onto the Overwatch wiki, pick a specific character and finding it out for yourself. So the majority of the player base will never know that Cassidy's Silver Bullet perk used to have a far bigger projectile size than his base weapon, which made it far more consistent and easier to deal lethal amounts of damage from range. So with projectile size being some of the most secretive and inconsistent things in Overwatch, let's fully go through how it secretly affects the game a lot more than people think. Now, if you're like me and most people, you'd probably see something like this in the patch notes and think, what the hell am I looking at? But these words, base projectile size and total projectile size, have a lot to do with the projectile size changes that happened in Season 9. Before Season 9, Hanzo had a projectile size of 0.1, which is what we now call the base projectile size. However, with Season 9, the goal was to increase the size of every projectile for every hero. So every hero in the game was given a global projectile size increase, and once you add that increased size to the base projectile size, we get the total projectile size. So I hope that clears that up for you. But you see, when I say the word projectile size, until Season 9, this only existed for projectile heroes. All hitscan heroes had 0 projectile size, meaning you'd only be able to hit the shot if the middle of your crosshair was perfectly aligned with the enemy hero's hitbox. Only projectile heroes were given that grace of not needing to hit the target perfectly in order for the shot to connect, which makes sense since projectiles are fundamentally more inconsistent than hitscan shots. But after Season 9, hitscan heroes were also given that leeway of not needing to perfectly connect, with them now having an actual quote-unquote projectile size. The standard for that projectile size today is 0.07, with the majority of hitscan heroes having this. There are of course exceptions like Widowmaker, who with the global increase became extremely oppressive. We quickly learnt that having a one-shot with a large hitscan bullet is way too overpowered, so she was quickly patched and given a projectile size of 0 again, which is what every hitscan hero was before Season 9. So Widow was one of the few heroes that weren't affected by Season 9. She was only really nerfed, with you now needing to charge your shots longer to one-shot people, with everyone now having more health. There's also exceptions with shotgun heroes like Reaper, Junker Queen, and for simplicity, let's just call Tracer and Diva shotgun heroes. These guns work a bit differently to traditional point-and-click hit scans like Ashe and Soldier 76. These weapons have a random spread over an arc that gets bigger with distance, which means up close it becomes a lot more effective than at range. So if their projectile sizes are too big, then it'll make more of those individual pellets hit an enemy, which would effectively increase their damage pretty significantly. So they were only given a projectile size of 0.04 instead of the standard 0.07. When you see a change to a hero's projectile size, like for example the recent Shion change that severely reduced the size of our secondary fire, you may just brush over it as a nothing burger change because you could now just call it a skill issue for people that can't hit their shots like me. While that is true, we can't just look at this change and think, well, big deal, the number barely changed. Because once we start looking at the projectile size as a circle around your crosshair, we can see that the change is far greater than you initially thought, especially when we start looking at the maths. The radius of the circle got reduced about 2.4 times its original size, which was shown on the patch notes. But the whole area of the circle, which is what is really considered the projectile size, was reduced about 6 times its original size. This tells you that any incremental change in a hero's projectile size actually has a huge impact on the consistency of your hero. You must have noticed it for yourself. Before the Shion change, you may have been unstoppable with the secondary fire, but now that it's been standardized, you're not hitting them juicy one-shots near as much as you used to. The average player is never going to think about this though, because it's not a thing that's directly shown in front of them the same way a damage change or a cooldown change is. When you change the damage of something, you get that instant feedback of no knowing that you hit that guy for a lot more than you did before. But with a projectile size change, there's no clear indicator that explains why your hero feels worse than before, but a projectile size nerf means that effectively over the course of a game, you're going to be doing less damage. For example, if you're hitting 7 shots out of every 10 shots, but in the next patch, the projectile size of your hero was reduced, your average shots per 10 could reduce to about 5 or even 4, which over the course of a game would add up to a pretty huge difference in damage. The devs understood this, which is exactly why the health pools were also changed alongside of projectiles in Season 9. More damage being thrown around means you'll be taking more damage, so you'll need more health to compensate for that. So when you change a hero's projectile size, it indirectly means that hero will effectively deal less damage. A good Overwatch player understands how to play differently against different matchups. A good Genji player knows not to mindlessly dash into an Ana when she has both her cooldowns. A good Tracer player knows not to stick around a Cassidy long enough for him to react to you and stun you. But an even better Overwatch player understands how to strafe differently against heroes with larger projectile sizes. A habit the majority of the player base has developed is thinking that pressing A and D or moving your joystick left and right quickly in succession is the best way to avoid getting hit by an enemy. While that is true when fighting heroes with tight projectile sizes like Ashe or Widowmaker, when going against Mizuki or Kiriko, it's a lot more beneficial to do longer, more drawn out strafes to avoid getting hit. Think about it, when a Reinhardt throws a fire strike at you, it's big, slow, and easy to dodge, so you'd obviously do a long movement to dodge it. The same concept can be applied when fighting another hero with a slow moving projectile. Like when fighting a Mizuki, if you were to do quick strafes left and right, he doesn't even need to move his crosshair in order to hit you every time, because your hitbox hasn't left his projectile size circle. It's only when you start doing deeper strafes do you leave this circle, and the Mizuki has to predict where you're gonna go next. The same concept can be applied to Kiriko, Hanzo, or any hero with that kind of projectile. So projectile sizes even affect these micro interactions you have with different heroes. And if you understand this concept, you'll be a lot better at avoiding shots from that Kiriko that seemingly can't miss a headshot on you. I see this so much with Tracer players who constantly claim that Kiriko is always headshotting me indoors, but when looking at the way they strafe, it makes it so damn easy for the Kiriko to simply place her crosshair and hold down primary fire to land an easy 2-tap. Come on. There's been times in Overwatch's history where projectile sizes were so insane they had to be patched out as soon as possible. We already talked about how Widow quickly became the best hero in the game shortly after the Season 9 update, but something that isn't brought up enough is Tracer's pulse bomb size was so unbelievably huge for a while. You couldn't miss pulse bombs if you tried. You see, the way pulse bomb is balanced is by the fact that you're going to miss pulse bombs, whether you're the best player in the world or not. So having it after every fight is balanced because you could very well just miss and not find any value with it. But once they increased the size of the pulse bomb, that balance philosophy went out the window and you could hit these pulse bombs left, right, and center. You could legitimately completely miss a target and still get the stick. It was a pretty big oversight because the projectile size changes weren't specific to any heroes. They were global modifiers that were applied to everyone as a whole, only they were put into groups like weapons with spread or massive slow moving projectiles, that kind of thing. So with pulse bomb being part of one of those groups, you could understand how that was overlooked. That's basically what they've been doing for a lot of other heroes over the years. They applied the global modifier to everyone and then slowly tuned the heroes who they realized benefited way more from larger projectile sizes than others. They did that with Kiriko a few patches ago. They did it with Genji, although I don't agree at all with that change, but I won't go into that. I have a whole 7-minute TikTok video going through all the changes they made to Genji. But also Iyari, who for some odd reason had a far larger projectile size than what's considered the standard for every hit scan. And also recently, as of making this video, they finally nerfed Cassidy's silver bullet projectile size down to what it's supposed to be. Finally! I hope you now understand that under the surface, projectile sizes affects Overwatch a lot more than people think. And when you make changes to it, it has major repercussions. This is honestly why you could easily consider Season 9 the biggest shift in Overwatch's gameplay. More than perks, more than 5 new heroes, maybe not more than 5v5. Because once you break it down, you clearly see that projectile sizes is one of the most valuable pieces of information to know about a hero.